Hey guys, it's Shonda Hunt here, and in today's episode, we're going to finish up with Nuke's viewer tools. Here, we have the gain and the gamma slider. Nuke processes everything in 32-bit floating point, so there are times when you won't be able to view all the information that's on the screen. And that's where these built-in gain and gamma sliders come in handy. When you need to check if the colors are correct in your very dark or very bright areas, you can adjust these sliders. I often use these sliders when color correcting, checking to see if there are holes in my mat, or we're matching the black and white points between two different images. Of course, we will cover all these things in future episodes. As with all of the viewer tools, these controls will only affect what you're seeing in the viewer. They will not affect your final image or your final render. Here we have the timeline controls. The first box that we see here will display the end point of our sequence, which is the first frame of our sequence. Right below that, we have a series of drop-down boxes. The first drop-down we have is for the desired playback frame rate. By default, it's set to whatever frame range you have set up in your project settings. So we see we have it set to 24 in our project settings, and it's set to 24 here. We can use this drop-down to change the frame rate to whatever we would like to watch our footage playback at. When I'm reviewing and QCing my renders, I like to change the frame playback to 8. It's much easier to find issues when the playback is set to a low number. The next drop-down is for the time code display. You can set this display in the time, either in frames or in time code. And once I change it to time code, you'll see all of the time displays on the timeline will change. Usually, we'll be viewing our footage in the frames time code. Lastly, we have a drop down here, which is for the frame slider range. By default, it will be set to global. And this will show the frame rate on the timeline to match whatever you have in your project settings. So right now my project is set to 100 frames. If I change that to 200, we can see that the timeline also changes to 200, and that's because for now I have it set to global. If we switch this to input, it will use the frame range of the image that we have connected to the viewer. My footage only has 100 frames, so when I change it to input, the frame range changes to 100 frames. Next, we have the in and out. This will show the frame ranges that we have set up as our in and out point. For now, we haven't set anything up for our in and out, so it's just displaying the last option that we selected. If we switch the drop down to visible, it will display whatever frames we have zoomed in and out on. We can zoom in and out by clicking our mouse in the viewer, hovering our mouse in the viewer, and scrolling using the middle mouse scroll wheel in and out of the timeline. And this is what will be displayed when we have the visible option selected. Next, we have a set of playback controls. There's a drop down here where you can change how you want your frames to play back. Let's set this back to global. Right now, we have it set to repeat. So if we click play while it's set to repeat, and we'll actually change our project settings back to 100 the length of our footage. And let's watch what happens as the timeline plays all the way to the end. So as you can see, it's simply repeating. We can select the bounce option that will repeatedly play the image back and forth from head to tail. And as you can see, it goes to the end and then it bounces back as opposed to looping back over from the beginning. The next option we have is simply to stop. Once your footage plays through, the section between the in and out points stop. And the last option for this drop down is continue. Once it plays from the beginning to the end, it will ignore any in and outputs and just simply keep playing. Although we don't have any footage and we can't see the frames that are currently playing on the timeline, but we can see here, it's still playing. So we'll set this back to repeat. Next, we have our endpoint. And as you know here, we have an option to set our in and out points to be visible on the timeline. So if you go to any frame on the timeline, I'll simply go to 20, you can set that as your endpoint. And now immediately, since I changed the option to in and out, my timeline jumped to 20. I haven't set an out frame yet. If I set it, let's say at 80, the circle here is for your output. And now that I have my endpoint and my out point set, the frame range snapped to those points. Here, we simply have the go to the first frame or go to start. And here on the other side, we have the go to end. So if you want to go to the first frame on your timeline, based on what settings you have here, you can simply click these two options. If you want to turn off your in and out points, which will still be limited to your frame range on your timeline, whether you have the in and out set or global, if you set these in and out points, your timeline will still only play the frames between those 2 points. If you want to turn that off, there's the option here, which will turn off your in and out points. They will disappear. If you want them to show back up though, you can simply click this option again. Next we have go to the previous keyframe and go to the next keyframe. We don't have any keyframes set because we haven't done any work that required any keyframes. But let's just put a grade node here just to show you what happens when you actually have keyframes. So I'll click on the game, I'll add a keyframe, I'll move forward, I'll change the value, move forward again, and I'll change the value again. Now, while I'm viewing the grade node, if I go to previous keyframe, it will go to the previous keyframe. And if I click go to the next keyframe, it will go to the next keyframe. Even if I change my viewer to a different input, whichever keyframes are being displayed on the timeline are the keyframes that will be used when choosing these options to jump between keyframes. Next, we have the option to move between frames. It will go to the previous frame or the next frame. So this will move one frame at a time, back and forward. These options are the play controls. We can play forward and we can play our footage backwards. And as you can see, this number here is changing to match whichever frame you're currently on. Lastly, we have the option here to skip backwards and forwards using a set frame rate. By default, this is set to 10. So if I click forward, it will skip 10 frames forward. And if I click backwards, it will skip 10 frames backwards. You can change this to whatever number you want. And you can skip between frames. All right, guys, that's all we have for this episode. I'll see you guys in the next episode.